Hey kids, welcome back to another Story Rant. Eric Malachite here, and besides one or two really obscure systems, none of the big cyberpunk tabletop RPGs such as Shadowrun or Cyberpunk 2020 and Cyberpunk Red are covered under an OGL. Some systems have a ton of supplemental material for you budding cyberpunk GMs to run, others, like Cyberpunk Red, don't have much or really anything. A lot of people on the Cyberpunk Red Reddit have asked about supplemental adventures, and while a few people have done homebrews, there aren't nearly enough to cover everyone's games. So, what do you do if you're a new GM and you've got an itch to run one of these games? Well, I've invited New York Times and USA Today best-selling author M.D. Cooper, author of 131 books, and for the purposes of this video, headlining contributor to Neo Cyberpunk Volume 3. That's a mouthful. If I tried to list all of Mallory's achievements as an author, we'd probably be here all day, so I'll just let her summarize that.
Yeah, so I'm Mallory Cooper. I write under MD Cooper, and I have written about 127 fiction books and a few nonfiction books. And all of my fiction books take place in a universe I created called Aeon 14, including the story that's in Neo Cyberpunk Volume 3. And it's a near future to far future universe that I've made. It goes from roughly the year 2400 all the way to year 9000, has stories that sort of cover the width and breadth of humanity's exploration and transcendence. I've always wanted to write a little bit more near future, but my initial story started a little bit further out, but I've been kind of working my way backwards towards the current time because you can kind of tell messier stories in a way. If you get closer, like out in the distant future, like everything's all clean in Star Trek and stuff like that. But closer into the now, cyborgs look awful, and you can get captured inside of a VR, virtual reality for the end of all time and stuff like that. And it's kind of like makes for some fun, messy possibilities.
Oh, that's so much fun. So yeah, I was actually an Aeon 14 virgin. I've read a lot of your nonfiction stuff, and I love that stuff, but my wife tells me I'm a slow reader, and it's kind of true. I like to take my time with stories that I'm really enjoying and visualize them like I would a movie. So, yeah, I really enjoyed your story, and something that we're going to be doing, we're going to be taking you through 3 prompts based on short stories that you'll find in Neo Cyberpunk Volume 3, and ways that you could possibly change them up for an extra surprise. I'll be speaking from the perspective of a forever DM/GM, and Mal will be doing.
So I'll be working coming from the perspective of, I've done some DMing. I love playing. Also, when I write my books, a lot of times I feel like the DM and my characters are the players, refusing to do follow the adventure I've laid out for them as they do. So I should hopefully have some fun perspectives as well.
Excellent. Yes, that's exactly what I want to hear. So, what I want to ask you, as a player, because you and I have never played a game together, like at a table or anything like that, or a virtual tabletop. I know you said before we started this that you played a lot of D&D, but as a player, are there certain cyberpunk or science fiction concepts that you would have liked to see more of in your games that you partake in?
For me, one of the reasons why I played D&D and not a lot of and there weren't that many sci-fi prompts back in the day, especially, was that the sci-fi ones were a little too trite. They were a little too sci-fi fantasy, and I wanted grittier, more realistic sci-fi stuff. And I never really could quite find that. So I sort of just stuck with D&D, which is just pure fantasy. And then, all the magical rules made sense. But it would have been really cool to find myself a future sci-fi kind of setting where everything was like hard science fiction and like the laws of physics defined what you could and could not do, rather than just sort of like at the whim of a dice roll and the DM as much as anything else.
Hell yes.
Right?
So I just finished Project Hail Mary, and I am now a Project Hail Mary evangelist. Basically a simp. I love
fancy word for simp. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see so much application for like the scientific method being applied to even Call of Cthulhu scenarios. I was telling you about a scenario that I've been playtesting for a while, and one of the things that I came at it from, one of the perspectives was, okay, well, I've basically been a science communicator on ScienceGet for a while. I've read all of these scientific papers and whatnot, and I understand the scientific method. What if we had a game where, part of the objective was sort of like a Star Trek-y type cyberpunk thing where people are, playing the role of astronauts and being like, okay, we need to analyze these samples and whatnot. What processes do we need to go through? And unfortunately, a lot of the players, they don't really have the science background that I do. So they're just like, okay, so I make the roll, you know?
Yeah, that would be a little bit different. I can imagine something though where you're like, I fire the proton beam, and it tears them apart. And so then, the DM be like, well, do you understand what the Bragg peak is? And like how to make it so your protons traveling at relativistic speeds, just don't punch right through the person and do no damage. It's like, show me the white paper or something. Like, I would nerd out so much about that. And you have people like researching like stuff to try and come up with a reason why they can do something in the game.
Right. I mean, if you ever decide to run a hard science fiction game, I am down. Like, sign me up. That would be awesome.
Think about that. I have been noodling around making a tabletop game out of Aeon 14 for some time. So it could happen. You never know.
Oh, and with all like the OGL stuff right now, you're going to have a lot of options for what system, if any, that you want to base it on.
Yeah, it could be a lot of fun. It's also like, thinking about the amount of work that would be. I'm like, oh god.
Oh yeah.
Do I really take on another thing right now?
Yeah, as like my BNI group told me, just like you have a tendency to spread yourself a little thin, Eric. Maybe you shouldn't. And I'm like, yeah. But what if I did? What if I did? It's like the whole ADHD thing. Just never ends.
Yeah. It's like, but I really want to do it. It's so shiny.
Right? It's shiny. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into these prompts for our wonderful viewers. All right, so the first one is based off of Anna's story, and it follows a bunch of elderly boomers with malfunctioning cyber gear as they attempt to break out of an old folks' home run by robots, but things are not as they seem. So,
right.
This prompt, I loved this concept. Anna's story was really funny. Where would you take this? Like, knowing Anna's finished the story and everything, just like, where would you take it as a storyteller?
Well, I mean, I have like one of those phobias of like the insane asylum thing where you're being held against your will. So I would try to not dive into that too much because I think I might like freak myself out. I would probably play more along the lines of like comedy of errors and the robots, make it hard to get out, not because anything is malicious, just because the system's dumb and doesn't expect anyone to want to leave or something like that. And then it's sort of like, it's like just trying to like fool the machines, like A-Team style or something like that, with like contraptions they made in like craft shop and the crafting room and stuff like that to try and make their way out. I think I'd set something along those lines.
That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So it's funny you talk about like fears and phobias and whatnot. And since I run a lot of Call of Cthulhu, it's my favorite RPG. I've got it on my shelf. That's something that we always talk about in session 0. Are there any phobias that you don't want me as a GM to deal with? I mean, you hear about a ton of RPGs, horror stories where GMs overstep. They make a female player combo pregnant in game, and it's just really bad. So it's always important to have those things, make sure that those things are outlined on session 0.
Totally, yeah.
But as for me, so I'm not going to give away the twist at the end of the story because you guys should definitely read it. But for me, I think, I might seed this scenario into a larger story, perhaps, like when the old people leave the facility, maybe they wake up as if they were in a VR simulation, sort of like the Matrix type thing. And, it's all been done by some nefarious mega corporation or something. And you set up the big bad for the next scenario or what have you. I might do something like that. It's a conspiracy.
Yeah, that's right.
Literally.
Yeah, that totally works. Yeah. In fact, that's actually what my story in the anthology is doing.
Oh, yes.
Setting things up for a bigger story to come.
Speaking of your story, I don't want to save you for last. So how would you turn your story into a cyberpunk scenario, either for Shadowrun or really any of them?
Well, I mean, I've never played Shadowrun, so I couldn't say how I do it for that.
It's got more
But
like magic and like D&D tropey stuff, like there are elves,
okay.
but it's also cyber.
That's why, yeah, I remember hearing that stuff about it, which is why I was like, no, I want pure science fiction. But the sort of the premise of my story is that there's this woman who's being hired to infiltrate a place inside of a game. Because one of the things that I think is going to be entirely possible in the future is that the encryption levels within games and using things like blockchain technology and whatnot could make it so you could actually hide data inside of an object in a game. And then possessing that object within the game, then you actually have information that you can use outside the game. So, you actually would hire like guilds of mercenaries to protect your data inside the game. And in some regards, that's like cheaper than actually having like an actual, data center somewhere, because you're actually just sort of leveraging this existing system and doing some level of security through obscurity. So in the story, they hire this hacker, this thief inside the game. So she's a player to go and infiltrate this thing and steal this data. And they also are giving her this full dive sort of thing. So sort of like Sword Art Online for anyone who played that, where she's going into the game in a full sensory experience. So I think it could be kind of fun to do that, with a bunch of players and say like, okay, here's who you are in the real world, but here's who you are in the game. And now you can do this full dive experience and you're going to be stuck there for like a week or something like that, and you've got to basically finish this quest within a week, or, I don't know, the people who are doing it are going to like kill you off or something like that because you failed the test.
Sort of like that would be like a game within a game,
Yeah, exactly.
That's the whole lit RPG thing. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. Like it's very easy for lit RPG to be sort of a little too jokey, a little too, oh, well, this is just a video game that a bunch of people in the real world are playing and they're taking it too seriously, what I've seen of the genre. But yours really makes the stakes feel real. And I think that's an important part. Like any genre can be art.
I really wanted to write it so like it was a fantasy story set inside of a cyberpunk story. But then also, the game followed game rules. So there was sort of some weird stuff like that would never really work. But it's like, yeah, but it works in the game rules, so you can get away with it, So it's sort of like, you're almost like hacking the game rule system, which is also something that people do in, tabletop games. You're a lot of times trying to like work in like what kind of angle can I get in around what the DM's trying to enforce here.
Oh yeah, it made me think, like, especially the unique solution that the character uses later on, it made me think of like games that I've had where a player has done something and it has angered the DM because they did not expect that, and now the monster horde that they have spent hours planning is gone. I usually react like oh, that. That's awesome. I usually reward that sort of thing. I love creative thinking like that. I had an instance like this. We were doing a Dragon Ball RPG, right? I had a character, she was kind of a descendant of Bulma, and she had some key abilities, and she wasn't very powerful. She was a glass cannon, couldn't really stand up much in a fight, but she gets into this fight with these bruisers, and the GM who was running it, I rush up and I nat 20'd on a blast right over their heart and stopped his heart. Mm-hmm. And the guy was like, that was awesome. I love that. So like even in combat, I think creative thinking it's highly underrated, I think.
I think the most fun I've ever had is like creative thinking like that in combat in games, where someone comes up with some sort of crazy idea. They just like, they look at the scenario and something just clicks in their head and they go for it. So yeah, I had a couple of players and DMs reach out to me after reading the story, and some of them were like, dear God, I hope no one ever does this to me. And some of them were like, I am using this in the next game I play.
You're going to get hate mail.
I am going to be like, oh, it's MD Cooper's fault. She wrote this in a story.
That's awesome. I hope people do use this, actually.
Yeah.
That combination, especially. I'm not going to spoil it or anything. It's a great moment, though. So I guess we can move on to my story, then my scenario, which would follow a bunch of electrical workers who suffer extreme damage to their implants when the megacity's failing infrastructure sends a power surge through them. The megacorporation who owns the city has offered to replace your refurbished implants at a reduced rate. However, once the operation is done and you wake up in your medical beds and you go back to work, you start experiencing some strange things. Loss of time. Your bodies start acting weird. And at the same time, a series of murders starts to take place throughout the megacity, and it's going to be a bit of a race against time before the corporate police show up at your door to lobotomize you all.
Oh, lovely.
I deal in a lot of corporate horror when it comes to
Apparently
my
you
cyberpunk.
Repo the genetic opera vibes here.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised where that story went. I won't like go into details, but the story follows a single character. But if I were to use it for a scenario for like a group, it would sort of be like a whodunit almost, as they're trying to figure out, okay, which one of us is the problem, because someone's been brain hacked or something, and it's all lining up a little too neatly.
Almost like a game of Clue where you could be the killer.
Yeah, right. So you would, as a GM, I would handle this by saying, okay, I would take two players aside, like, hey, do you want to be the killer? And see who wants to play the red herring, or if nobody wants it, we add another party into it. I've had Call of Cthulhu scenarios like that, where my wife, her first time playing, decided, I'm going to be a secret cultist and I'm going to end the world. That's my goal. And she was so good at this that she actually pulled it off. Her character ended up dying. And like her best friend was sitting across from the table. It was just like jaw drop, like, oh, I cannot believe you just did this. Like, you've been lying this whole time. It's like it almost ended their friendship.
Did it really?
No, not really.
Oh my God.
But she was like, she's a very excited and bubbly person, you know? So she was just like, oh, how dare you? You know?
Oh, that sounds awesome. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, I don't always encourage, especially for like D&D games or fantasy-based games, for GMs to navigate like player versus player dynamics. But like sometimes that tension creates some really interesting roleplay opportunities too.
I would totally go for being the red herring character. I'd have so much fun doing that.
You know, I could totally see you doing that too.
I would be faking people out like crazy, and I would have these totally plausible reasons for why I'm behaving the way I am.
Oh yeah, that's the best too. When a player has like all of this planned out and like, no, I have my entire backstory figured out. I know exactly the angle that I'm going to take this at. I eat that shit up. Love it.
Yeah, it'd be a riot. It'd be so much fun to do that.
All right. So question for you, since we mentioned corporate horror, do you have anything like that in your own work that you would say put into a scenario?
Yeah, well, I think there's two of them. One of them I think I have to work on a little bit to think of how it could fit into a scenario, but I think we could go pretty well. So one of the things that's great is in my universe AM14, I work with a bunch of co-authors, and one of my co-authors was a captain in the army, and he was responsible for a lot of supplies and getting, there's a word for it. I suddenly can't remember what the word is, but basically just making sure stuff gets where it's supposed to be and everybody has what they need. And nothing ever went the way it was supposed to. The wrong stuff always arrived somewhere, someone was missing some sort of key piece of equipment. And he basically, his whole life was planned for failure and figuring out how to make it so that everything could function. So in the stories I co-wrote with him, he like comes up with all sorts of crazy ways where everything could go wrong and the worst stuff possible could happen when you don't expect it. And so one of the main premises in my books is this thing called the link. In the future, everybody has direct access to the internet in their brain. And depending on the quality you get, some of it's direct thought injection, some of it's just visual overlays and stuff like that. And it's so far advanced, you can basically go to a kiosk somewhere, and if you don't have one yet, and it'll just like an auto dock will just install the link for you. But if you go to like a really cheap one, your link's gonna have ads, basically. So you're gonna have like corporate ads and stuff like that, like appearing on your vision all the time as you're going past places and stuff like that, trying to get you to buy things and trying to influence your behavior and stuff like that. And even more subtle behavior prompts exist in the system to try and get you to do what they want to do. So it's kind of in a way a little bit like what you wrote, but not quite as subtle. Like the people are signing up for it, and it also created this idea of class warfare that you could put into the system too, where like the poor people have to suffer under this, and the wealthier people don't have to. So it was kind of horrible in a way if you think about it, like having your thoughts constantly bombarded with this information from other people, whether you want it or not.
Oh yeah. So I do that a lot in and I haven't released the second Neo Rackham book because that's a whole story. But characters who have like lower level implants and things like that, because there's a tiered system, it's not fair. Will be bombarded with those ads, absolutely. But what you're talking about, like the subtle psychology of it, where they try to manipulate you, I mean, that happens now with advertising.
Yeah.
So
but imagine if they had like direct access to your thoughts and they could do it.
Yeah. What are your customers thinking about right now? 7 tips for manipulating, sales figures. You could have a whole industry of self-help books for would-be, sales gurus built around that.
Yeah. You totally. Yeah. It's always fun to think like what side effects would that have? And then another version of it that came up was there's a bunch of different militaries for different planets. This particular part of the AM14 universe happens before humanity leaves the Sol system, but we colonize all sorts of worlds, and people live everywhere in the Sol system. And the Marsian government, the Marsians are kind of a very strict and totalitarian regime, and they in their soldiers they install an sort of like not a full AI, what we call in AM14 a non-sentient AI named Clarice, and Clarice actually like the soldiers will see her, they hear her voice and stuff like that. They all think they're the only one with a Clarice. And she basically encourages the soldiers to be in love with her and then convinces them to do everything that they're supposed to do according to what the government wants.
I love it.
And the tricky thing too is like even after people get freed from this, they desperately want to go back and get back into it too. So
because it's like an addiction. It is an addiction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. So you could do that where you could have people trying to free someone from that in a prompt, or, it'd be kind of fun to actually have a player who, someone like maybe another scenario where someone volunteered to do it, and maybe people didn't know that they had a Clarice, and they were like, they're like an infiltrator or something like that. So it could be doing all sorts of fun things.
Yeah, I'm working on a follow-up to my first book, and it's actually based off of one of the Call of Cthulhu scenarios that I wrote, the far future one, where some of it's going to be written from the perspective of the onboard ship AI as it's slowly becoming more sapient, and you're going to see it textured throughout each of its log entries, because they're going to be robotic to very scientific in the ways that it wants to pull people apart. Well, it's cosmic horror. It's cosmic horror. So like I'm nuts about cosmic horror. But I'm taking it
going on there.
Well, I wrote the scenario originally for my wife because she is a huge Alien fan, and I'm a big fan of The Thing. I love H.P. Lovecraft stories. I don't like the racism, but I like the stories and the ideas. So I was like, what if I had a far future thing that's kind of like has the paranoia of The Thing, but has sort of the creature feature aspect of it too that Alien has to a certain extent, but something that could always be different every time you ran it.
Right.
So, and I've playtested that twice. I'm going to playtest it again. The book is all from journal entries, so like you're going to get attached to people as they're pouring their hearts out into these things, and then they're going to die, But
that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. But those are 3 prompts for you guys to try out in your own games. Please, if you do try them out, I don't know, come back, comment down below, shoot me a message anytime. I love hearing from people. I don't know about Mal. Do you want to hear from players who try your scenario out?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that stuff's fun. I love that stuff. Anyway, Neo Cyberpunk 3 is out right now, so go ahead and pick it up. I'm going to have a link in the description and in a pinned comment. Closing thoughts, Mal?
I think if people like this stuff and want to do more of it, I would encourage people to come up with some really solid scientific kinds of scenarios where you're really adhering to what is scientifically possible and what's not, and see how you could weave that into a game to make it so that people have to maybe even reference real world stuff. I think that could be fun. I'd love to see people doing something like that. I would probably would join in a game like that, I think.
I would love to see Hail Mary turned into a scenario for, any system, really. I mean, but Chaosium's got the best systems, in my opinion. I don't know. I'm biased.
It's fine. We all are in some way.
Right. Anyway, it has been fantastic having you on. You have been a delight.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I'm going to put some links down for your Amazon page too and whatnot. And where can people find you online?
The best place to find me is if you go to aeon14.com. That's AEON14.com. You can reach out there. And also, I'm around on Instagram as Mallory Cooper. And you can also find me under the same name on Facebook if you message me there. I'm usually respond pretty quickly.
Yeah, you're always super approachable too, which I love. And I don't know, your posts are fun.
Thank you. I do like to have fun.
All right, people. Have you run a Cyberpunk Red campaign? What has been your experience? Let me know down in the comments below. Until next time, see you, Space Cowboy.